Only item for other business tonight is a presentation of the Downtown Parking Analysis prepared by Walker Consultants, presented by Brett Richardson.
Hey everybody, Brett Richardson, I'm the Development Director for the town. We've talked a lot about downtown housing. It's been a consensus among the community that we need downtown housing. And a strategy to do that is to convert surface parking to housing. Adequate parking for our businesses downtown is key too, right? So we're in the process of, as we try to invite housing, making sure that we're striking that right balance. And that's a policy decision and an economic land use decision too. So if we go too far in supporting conversion, we can make Freeport a less convenient place to visit. If we don't go far enough in supporting conversion, then we're asking property owners to maintain expensive infrastructure and maybe preventing the highest and best use for our land that could increase our tax base. So this is an important question. I'm happy to have Greg Strangeways tonight from Walker Consultants with a PACS Portland Area Comprehensive Transportation System grant that provided this research for us. And it's important to note, too, that this project and this study came right out of the downtown vision. So what you're seeing tonight is sort of a culmination of a recommendation from the downtown vision. The climate action plan that was recently approved supports downtown housing. The dog bone report that we've talked about recently supports the type of infrastructure, trails, pedestrian connectivity, safe biking routes that can help reduce traffic demand, which we'll hear about from Greg. So it's an exciting time, and I think Sophie mentioned the main DOT Planning Partnership Initiative, which will hopefully kick off here pretty soon. And that's going to be looking at this downtown area, too, in terms of how to make sure that we're supporting all kinds of transportation, including cars, but other modes as well. So this is a good time. It's a relevant data point, and turn it over to Greg so he can share what he learned by looking at our parking in Freeport.
Thanks, Brett, and thank you all for taking some time with this project here. So yeah, Greg Strangeways from the Boston office of Walker Consultants. This is a parking study, but as Brett said, it's really driven by the need for housing. That there's a lot of national momentum recognizing the housing shortage, and then very specifically even recognizing that building off-street parking and maybe specifically having to build mandated off-street parking is expensive. Cars take up a lot of space, so it's money and land in many cases that could be used for more housing units or for other uses. And certainly here, it sounds like even from just listening tonight, you have this housing workshop next week. You have this planning partnership initiative project, which my company did not bid on for various reasons, but we certainly wish you the best of luck with it. So it's great that you're really thinking about enabling more housing to be built here. So that's what we really were looking at and were tasked to do. The study area is this, mostly your VC1 district. It is the same as that downtown vision study. As Brett said, this really came out of that as a need to drill down and look at parking specifically. And then really the question was, you have, fairly uniquely this shared parking system. For a long time, you've, allowed people to build less parking if they put their parking into the shared system, so that's great. And with that, you have a lot of surface parking. And is there enough to allow some new housing to be built, which could take away some of the parking supply and also add some parking demand? But could you allow some of that housing to be built without any additional parking and still have enough parking? As Brett said, you're trying to balance that. You want adequate parking, but you don't want to have overbuilt parking. So that was really the question here. If housing could be built with no new parking, how much housing? So next slide. So we did really focus on the shared system. There is some other downtown parking. The map is from the Downtown Vision Plan 2022. But the ones that were formally part of the shared system, so there was 2,310 of those off-street, and then we also did a little bit of our additional analysis on the on-street and counted only those that were at least 3 hours or more, so relatively unrestricted, not 1 hour parking. So out of those, 2,355. We didn't do full counts ourselves, but the town had already done a lot of counts over the last few years. And in addition to specific counts, they had used drones and had some aerial photography. So all in all, we were pretty comfortable using all that data. And the best practice really is to design for a typical busy day. You want enough parking. You don't want to fall short regularly on busy days. But you also don't want to build for the church for Easter Sunday, as some people say, right? You don't want to build for your absolute busiest day of the year. You're just going to have a lot of parking that goes unused most of the time. And again, takes up a lot of room and costs a lot. So generally, we're kind of looking at the 85th percentile. There wasn't enough data to say exactly what that was here, but we did, from the counts, use that as our guide, basically. And even on busy days, again, only 39% of these shared system were occupied. By the way, you can stop me anytime. I think all this will only be about 10 minutes, but you can interrupt me anytime with a question. Yep, go ahead.
I just read in the report, and it reminded me, I read it earlier, that you found that only 2 days actually exceeded the 85th percentile?
Yeah, of the ones we had counts. So the busiest day that has been counted in the last few years was Black Friday, one of the years, day after Thanksgiving, and 72% of the spaces were used that day. But again, it was really an outlier, and again, from all the data we had, that's, you're going to have some days, whether you have special events, you have festivals. So, we want to acknowledge that there is going to be some days, and we think, I sometimes have brought up the example of Hampton Beach for the Seafood Festival in September, and they just, they handle the parking for the summer season on site, but for that they can't, so they run shuttles. So for those, extraordinary days, it may be good to use special measures and not, design the parking system for those busiest days. But yes, it seemed to be relatively uncommon, but still there are a few days per year where under our proposal here, you wouldn't have enough parking. Okay. And so then we looked at what would happen. We're really focused again on housing, although we know that some housing could come in a mixed-use development. So our main tool for this is the Urban Land Institute's shared parking model. So even though it says shared parking, the ratios for each type of land use are synced up with the ITE, International Transportation Engineers Manual. So for each single use, it is focused then on, sharing uses when there's peaks at different times. And maybe more relevant here is that some people are going to be able to get to a site without driving and parking. We know Freeport, it's pretty auto-oriented. There's not a lot of options here, but we're going to talk a little more about that because we do think you can influence that to some degree by having people, have other options to either park once and then be able to get around other ways, or even maybe not bring a car at all. You do have some bus service here. You have Amtrak, obviously. You have bike paths. Anyway, we needed to make some assumptions about this. So we tried to work with, as we've talked about already, a lot of work has been going on here about this. So what we basically assumed, just usually an acre of surface parking can hold about 125 parking spaces, but some of this new housing might be on lots. The Dog Bone report, the Transportation-Oriented Development Initiative came out with a report and identified kind of 11 acres that could be developed. We didn't get into which specific parcels would be developed, but using that, we just estimated that of the new housing that might be developed, 75% of it would go on sites that are currently part of the shared parking system. Not all of it, because there is some other private parking or not shared parking anyway. So that's what we used for that assumption, that each acre developed for housing would take away 94 spaces from the supply. We had to come up, the one good thing about the shared parking model is that it does relate parking demand to the size of residential units. Sometimes municipal zoning doesn't do that, but practitioners, always see that bigger units have more people, therefore more vehicles, more parking demand. So we did want to come up with an assumption about the unit mix in these new apartments that would be built. And we also didn't get into, affordable housing or senior housing. So those would typically have lower demand. So again, we figure this is pretty conservative to use market rate apartments and use this mix. It sounds like you might even, in the end, have a slightly weighted more towards smaller units more studio apartments. But we figured this was a conservative way to look at it. And then some other assumptions. So that dog bone report, as we refer to it, we use that really for our guideline. You're not obviously going to have high rises here, but what type of housing would be developed? And it looked to be in that range of 52 to 60 units per acre. So our scenarios kind of show that range for the housing development. We work with many municipalities that are, because of the demand, thinking about starting to charge for parking in their densest areas, maybe leaving free parking more to the fringes. But
Careful,
we didn't.
man.
We didn't.
Freeport, careful.
We did not see a need for that here. It didn't seem like where you were headed. There is, again, a good amount of surface parking, so we're assuming it remains unpaid. And then again, we did, we'll again touch on this a little bit more, but all of these, not every one of these tools on the screen is, relevant here. Since you're not charging for parking, there's not really a parking cash out option. But, a lot of these things could reduce the parking demand. We tried not to kind of go crazy with this. We know it's not Boston, but that still you can influence demand to some degree here. So we wanted to bring that in. And again, we're designing here for this typical busy day that would occur a couple of times a month, but not for the really rare days, a few days a year, where you might need to take kind of extraordinary measures to meet the demand, like shuttling people from parking that's maybe outside the downtown here. Okay, one other factor we wanted to bring in. So the retail typically generates much less parking demand than restaurants. So you can see the difference there. The restaurants are roughly 4 times the vehicles per square foot. And it's similarly for entertainment or other uses. And, Freeport is pretty heavily weighted towards retail uses at this point. So we, again, just to be conservative, put in this, we increased all the occupancy we saw by 10%, just to account for that in the future some of these parcels might change from retail to something that's more intensive for parking demand. All right, and then this is what we came out with. So this is the high demand is, basically parking demand patterns continue as they are today. There's not really any interventions to change that. The new development, again, takes away some of the supply and adds some demand. But even with that, again, assuming this 39% occupied is your busy day that you're kind of designing around, in the new residential units, we do actually have a higher rate of vehicle ownership than we see today from the data, and that is, tends to be what happens with new construction. That's, tends to be a little more affluent population, more likely to want to own a vehicle or vehicles. And some of this disruption from COVID we have seen where people even more, they want to have a car nearby even if they don't use it that often. So that's that high demand scenario. The mid demand has some intervention then on the transportation demand side, TDM. So we tried for this mid demand to use some of the easier, cheaper initiatives. You may know Maine already has the Go Maine program to help people match rides for carpools. So again, for some employees to the area, that could be incentivized, or at least there could be tools to help find rides. Preferred parking for carpoolers, there's ways to encourage that, to enforce that even, and that could be an incentive again for people to share a ride if they're working at the same place or near each other and at the same times. Microtransit shuttle service, that's on demand, so you call for a ride, but it's more like an Uber Lyft model and responds, within 30 minutes, let's say, typically. That is a little more expensive, to operate than just, allowing people to match their own rides, but it is getting popular as an alternative to fixed route transit, and many municipalities are adopting that for, could be for seasonally, could be for peak times only, could be more throughout the day. And then the lowest demand scenario, so you can see with each one, we show the people who are already parking in the system get a little bit less, and then the new development, residential development, they own slightly fewer cars. So again, we tried to be somewhat conservative with this, but if there really are interventions to help people, again, maybe bring a car and park once, but then be able to get around walking, biking, shuttles, or perhaps even come on the train or bus and not bring a car at all. So anyway, with all that, you can kind of see the range there, but I think the next slide kind of sums up our central finding. Which again, on most days of the year, you would still have enough parking while allowing, between 400 and 510 units to be built with no additional parking. They would use the shared system. And that's, just in the VC1 district, which matches the study area pretty closely, but there's some of the study area was slightly outside the VC1 district. And then I think there's one more slide about, things you could do with this. So one is, again, I think, even if you don't necessarily want to go whole hog and eliminate, parking minimums and allow new residential development to just use the existing parking, there is a lot of momentum to relax these or reduce these parking minimums. You've already, again, done some of that. You've encouraged the use of the shared system. But there may be, again, if we agree that there is, available shared parking that could at least meet some of the new demand, that may be a way to do it. Or alternatively, developers want, that kind of certainty, and developments might be proposed here that wouldn't otherwise if you really change the parking minimums. But alternatively, you could sort of let it be known that you will, listen to these proposals to build less parking or build no parking for new housing. So again, I know you're talking a lot about housing, and we hope all this kind of informs that. And then, we also just, as we kind of went through all this, we weren't focused on other land uses, but we did notice your parking minimums are in this district are the same for retail and restaurant. And as we talked about, restaurant generates a lot more. There's nothing wrong with what you have by the numbers, 3 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of retail. We just showed that it often is around 4. But again, if we agree there's some available parking already that can meet some of the demand, you maybe could reduce the retail minimum and keep the restaurant minimum, and again, encourage development that way, maybe as part of mixed use with housing, or maybe separately. So again, just an idea as we kind of work through some of these. So I think that's it. Happy to take any more questions. Yep.
Any cut or discernment about, I think there's a considerable effort to increase the amount of restaurants in the community, because that helps with a vibrant downtown, or at least we're hoping maybe they follow the housing that we're hoping to get in. But is there any distinction in your data if the restaurant is providing parking on its own property, as opposed to having to rely on the shared system or the general, open public spaces?
Yeah, so I realized when we threw this in at the end, we didn't actually really look at any other land uses besides housing. The focus for the study really was how much housing could be built. Yeah. But yes, when we typically do a study for a mixed-use development or any development, we are just looking at what's the expected demand and then what is the supply. And so certainly some of that supply could be shared and some of it not. Many municipalities do that where a new development builds some of their own parking, but also maybe as an agreement to use some shared parking.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I have data questions. The counts that you used were the ones that the town has been doing over the last several years. Do you know the years of those counts? Are they in the last 5 years or longer ago?
They were 2021, 22, 23 mostly, just because we were starting this in 2024, so some of those weren't done. We, I think, got a few more from that, and then the drone photography was 2024, I think. So.
Okay. All different seasons, different days of the week.
Yeah, it was focused on busy seasons, so summer. And the holiday shopping.
Okay. And then there was a lot of focus on the 85th percentile, where we have 39% of spaces occupied. Is that right?
Right.
So 85th percentile means one day, six out of the 7 days a week, more or less, 85%.
Yep.
Take. If we're looking at the peak top 3 days of the year, that's like 1%, 99th percentile.
Yep.
So is there another number between 6 days a week and not planning for those 3 days a year.
Yep,
that we
and
can-
I should actually mention, sometimes I worry about getting too into the weeds of this. It was a great question. The actual standard in the model is 85th percentile for most land uses, including residential, but it's the 20th busiest shopping hour of the year for shopping, because we do recognize that in retail, so much of the business is in the intensive holiday season. So, and again, the model is really, it first came out in 1983. It gets updated. The last one was 2020, so it is pre-COVID data. But we also do our own research, try to adjust for any post-COVID things. But anyway, so for retail, it does actually reflect that it's much closer to what you're talking about than the 98th, 99th percentile.
So could you say more about that? You said it's the 20th busiest shopping hour. That's the target for.
Right.
You're trying.
Right. Now, again, the data we had was focused on busy days to begin with, and then we tried to pick, there was very few outliers that seemed like it's, really not what you want to design for. But I can't say that we had enough data to do the full statistical analysis. But we do think it fits with the intent of, what the shared parking model is all about. Their motto for it is just enough, no regrets, so that everybody wants enough parking, but you don't really want to just overbuild for something that's rarely used. So,
Yeah, okay.
But it is a great question there.
Yeah, thanks. Question, I don't know if this one's for you or for Brett, but there's always projects we hear about that are in the works. Like we have some projects, housing projects proposed here or there or the other. As those get built, which I know is still a long time away, do we have the model that we can rerun these numbers and say, okay, the new totals are now 1,500 spots, and now we run the numbers against.
Yeah, all of these assumptions. So that's what we did, is not only provide, there is a report, which it sounds like you've seen, and then we also provided a tool where you can adjust any of these assumptions so that going forward, because, yeah, we realize that's really maybe the more valuable part, is, we laid out something here, and there's instructions in it, and, we're always available to help if there's a question. But yes, so you can kind of change any of these assumptions. If you want to shoot for something above 39%, that's easily doable in the spreadsheet tool we provided.
Great. Okay. So we might have to do more counting, but if we get 2 projects built, and then we say, okay, where are we now? Do some counting and saying, okay, we still have room, or we still have room. And then at some point, we're like, okay, now we got to rethink. Great. All right.
The good news is we have one parking lot that's been blocked off for a while on Depot Street, and then we have a large tent and one part of
All right.
downtown too. So in some ways, there's almost a baby step in that test direction right now on the ground.
Yeah. Good point.
Those are both counted in the data here, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that is the idea. As you get more information, you could kind of refine this approach.
I think it's remarkable that with in my opinion, a relatively conservative consumption ratio, that the data shows without adding a single parking spot, we can add 500 units of housing in the VC1. Mm-hmm. If you were to bring forward in a 2 or 3 year period, 500 units of housing, holy mackerel. I mean,
Yeah.
And well, anyway, it's just striking that we have that much capacity
I just want
from a
to
parking perspective.
be very clear that that number of housing we could add also takes into account the parking we would lose.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this land use for more restaurants, less retail.
The parking you'd lose and the parking that would be consumed by the residents in those units, and we still have adequate spaces, a surplus of just the shared. That's not the private lots. That's remarkable.
Yeah, we didn't know there was a lot of surface parking here, but, we didn't know what the result would be. But you're right, it's
huge.
a significant amount of housing that, we think, again, using this model could be developed without new parking.
Yeah, that's right.
I have a question just on the minimum for retail versus restaurant. And I understand, I think, in concept why retail would require less parking in terms of amount of time particular people are spending in a retail store versus a restaurant. Is there something else in that calculation that you could identify? Because my concern, and I'm thinking why Freeport has the same minimum for retail and restaurant, is that we're taking into account that somebody's going to park in that space once and hopefully visit multiple stores. So the amount of time that that space is going to be occupied is on par with the amount of time that person might spend in a restaurant, because they're visiting multiple stores during the time that they're there.
Yeah, so I would say that is part of the captive markets, we call it, people who either work or live and are already parked, or yes, they're parking once and visiting multiple establishments. That is part of the shared parking model, but the base ratio I'm talking about there, that isn't really a factor. Those are like same in ITE, which isn't looking at any of that. You would have retail with a much lower parking demand ratio for retail versus restaurants. And so the one thing to remember is that we're talking about the peak demand times. So again, it is 85th percentile, but just, stores, you're only just going to have so many people at one time in there and it is the amount of time also that you're staying. Whereas, for dinner time or lunchtime in a restaurant, you can fit a lot of people and they're going to, be there for the duration of the meal.
So it's much more about the density of the square footage. The
Yes.
number of people in that square footage.
Yes. It's both, though. People do stay a little longer in restaurants compared to stores. So it's the time spent and the number of people per square foot.
Thank you.
This is great.
One more question. It might be irrelevant, but I'm just curious about it. So there's a chart in here, the time of day adjustment factor, and it accounts like overnight residential parking peaks overnight because people are at home and that's where their cars are. During the day, it dips a little bit, but not, all the way down to zero. It dips to 60-something percent.
Yep.
It shows that visitors in peak between 7 p.m. and 10 p.m., which I would love to see in Freeport, but I don't think that's true in Freeport. The chart shows that, the 7 a.m. through 4 p.m. is all the same, which is at 20% of peak. I don't know if that made it into the methodology or if that's just, this is
So that's
the industry guideline.
That's visitors to residences is what we're talking about there. The residential parking, again, that's all we were really focused on. So we only kind of go into detail about housing. But so it's the residents themselves and then their visitors. And yes, the visitors
to somebody.
To residences park on Friday night and Saturday night.
Not shoppers
evening.
or dining.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
I know we have a few folks who want to
That's
speak.
great you're reading it. Sorry.
But before we get to other folks, I just want to make sure counselors are all set. All right, Brett, you just have to be here for 20 more years to keep adjusting all of these models to make sure we stay on track and don't overshoot. All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ray.
Yeah, that was interesting. Thank you, Andrew Arsenal. I have a question towards shared parking. And I remember when I used to come to meetings years ago and people gave shared parking, it was usually that they had parking to put in the pool. And that became shared parking because they had a storefront. They were reduced their mandates for square footage for parking because they went to shared parking. Now, if you build a housing development and it has no parking, how do you use somebody else's shared parking when you put none in the pool? I mean, I've never heard anybody say how they're going to accommodate this. I've asked for years, how many lots are assigned to how many storefronts downtown? I never really got an answer. We have lots of parking studies, but we never seem to get to who's, which storefront, which parking spaces are theirs. And now that we've changed the parking ratios, do they have extra? And can they rent them through the town to a development? But to show up and say, I'm going to build completely on the lot, and I'm going to use somebody else's shared parking when I put none in myself, I think that would have to be a change of some kind of ordinance language or permissions from the people that own those parking lots. So, I mean, we hear a lot about using other people's shared parking, but it's really not the town's shared parking. It belongs to the business owners uptown that own those lots or control those lots, because that's what was mandated for them to have storefront on Main Street, and it had to be 600 feet from the front door. So I'm curious if that ever got calculated into how we're going to build 500 units downtown on, without any parking. We're going to use somebody else's. So I think that should be part of this mix. And I'm not against downtown housing. You know that. But I'm also concerned about landowners that have purchased, lots and made the investment into those lots so they can have a storefront downtown.
Yeah.
And they're taxed on that. So,
Important consideration for sure. I mean, Brett, do you have any thoughts to that, or?
yeah.
I mean, it's a great question. I think, there's an example of a housing project that was approved over here on Depot Street a couple years ago that was 67 units. And I might get the numbers off by a little bit, but I believe that they were able to site they used shared parking for a portion of it, and they used dedicated parking for another portion. And so they were able to fit 67 units on an acre with about 35 or so parking spaces on site. And then they went off site into the pool and secured those parking spaces to meet the need. So I think what we're talking about is potentially creating more flexibility for property owners. If you reduce the minimums, they have the option to keep that land and parking if they think that's the highest and best use for the land. But if they don't, and the town doesn't dictate that, then they would have more flexibility to use that land to what they believe to be the best and highest use, and that could be either leasing it or selling it, or to somebody else who could use it for a different use. I think we talked about parking recently. The pool has a surplus, and there has been very little demand for that surplus over the last several years, and that the cost of parking from a rental space, if you were to come in and bring a business and had to find a space, the rental rate for parking has continued to sort of go down. So I think it's a valid point. It's kind of the point of this study is to make sure that we're understanding, where that risk is if we go too far. But I think that there's adequate pool. In talking with the planning staff currently, there is in the ballpark of 500 spaces on the earth today that are not meeting a requirement.
But they belong to somebody.
They do.
Yeah.
And I think, it's theirs, and if they would like to put it to some other use, they could. I don't think the town is suggesting, or the point of this discussion, at least as I understand it, is not to suggest that we would go to a property owner and dictate that they convert their parking to housing, or even that they must lease their parking to a housing developer to meet that housing developer's need. It's simply pointing out the fact that if you look at the data, there appears to be a surplus. And then if the town were to look at policies, the policies would be create more flexibility. And that's all. And it's up to the property owner to do what they wish with their property. That's how I think about it.
That doesn't answer my question.
I guess one question, though, is I think to your point, Andy, is what are multifamily housing, what is the parking requirement that development would still have to provide, even though they are building on an existing parking lot?
Well, they're talking about no parking requirements and using shared lots. But my question is, if we have extra in the pool, that still belongs to somebody, and we can't just come here and say, you can build a house, and then you can just go park in somebody else's lot, is my point. And I think you need to decide how you're going to handle that. Now, if other people have excess space and they want to make a deal with this guy, I think that's fine. And that's what's always gone on. It's been fun. It's been, shuffled through the town hall to make sure that everybody has a space or whatever it is, and the town extracts a little piece of that action. And but I think we need to decide. You still need people are going to have one car, maybe two, and unless you put your parking space in the pool, you can't really say I'm a shared parking guy, because the system always was. Steve's got a storefront. He's got so many parking spaces. He says, I don't quite meet it, so I'll put mine in shared parking, and then he meets the requirement. And then, of course, Steve has put parking in the pool so that other people can use that shared parking. But if you're having a house and there's no parking for it, how can you go and say, I'm using shared parking?
So, but to your point, all of that has always been based on what the parking requirement for each type of business and the square footage.
Yes, but it also meant that you, the tenant, the landowner, put parking in a pool. You had a parking lot to put in the pool and say, my parking is now shared.
Well,
if you do this housing development without any parking, how do you access the shared parking?
Or you had to lease it.
That's right. Or you had to lease it. And that's
So
what I'm
you
getting
don't
to.
have
If we
to
got
own it.
500 extra spaces, maybe the housing thing should lease those, not just walk onto somebody else's shared parking.
Well, and that's, to my point, that's why I think what we're looking at and what the planning board is going to have to look at is what is the minimum parking requirement for any multifamily housing? Because it's one thing to say let other people figure it out.
Yeah, that's not a good answer.
Which works if all of your parking is based on the market.
That's right.
If that's the case, but if you're requiring everyone else to provide parking in terms of commercial use, but you're not requiring housing to provide parking, then to your point, you're just putting that parking requirement onto somebody else.
Yeah.
So I
without compensation.
Take your point.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think Andy makes a great point. I think we do need an assessment of parking capacity, who owns it, what the restrictions are, because the unintended consequence of this is that we'll get further down the road with development, and all of a sudden we'll find ourselves having made a smaller number of parking spots that are worth more, and someone could come in and cut deals, and then all of a sudden we don't have free parking downtown, we have paid parking, and that's an unintended consequence of what we're trying to do. So I think it's just a piece of the puzzle. We need to definitely understand the landscape and make sure we're not making short-sighted decisions that are going to put us in a position where all of a sudden we go from having a surplus of parking, it's great, no one has to worry about it, to it being a scarce commodity that's now monetized and we are SOL.
Yes, I agree. And before I see you want to speak, but we have Mary Davis, FEDC, on as well.
I really like this dialogue. I appreciate it.
She should be.
All right, go ahead, Mary.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? This is Mary Davis, president of Freeport Economic Development Corp. And I just want to start out with saying thank you to the town, to the council, to Brett, and to this organization for bringing this data to us. I think once we have this data in front of us, now we have the ability to make decisions based upon real information. And I'm so pleased to have that. So thank you, all of you. I think the second thing that I would say is, as Brett notated, our developers, our housing developers to date, are planning parking on their developments because they know that there's some amount of parking that they'd like to have close to their apartment builds. So I think the idea of having no parking, we have not seen that as of yet, but there also has been a desire to use other parking, like the parking garage, to be able to lease lots. So I think we, as you all have said, have some further look at to do there, but I think our developers would work with us. And then the final thing that I wanted to say is, again, thank you, town, and thank you, Visit Freeport. We have trialed the idea of having trolley buses move people around in Freeport, and it has been successful. I think it was done at the Oyster Festival and the Freeport Fall Festival. And we have a little bit of experience to do that. So I like the idea of, on our busiest days, moving people around in a more efficient way. So again, thank you so much. This is exciting to see us moving forward and having information that helps us to make better decisions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jay Yilmaz. I'm a property owner of commercial and residential in town. Greg, want to thank you for your report and Brett for helping push it along. I did have a couple questions as part of my overall questions for Greg. Are you able to get the microphone? So, because I don't think you're supposed to have the microphone if you speak.
I think, yeah.
Well, you can walk up. Yeah, join me. Yeah, please. Yeah, I don't want this to be an inquisition, but I also want to thank the council for being open to a dialogue. This is really an important issue, and I do, as everybody knows, support housing. I just get very concerned about, like Matt pointed out, and I think Dan's questions kind of alluded, and a few other people's were alluding to, the unintended consequences that could happen if we don't consider what could happen if we build too much. As I understand, 50, here, come closer, I don't bite. Yeah, 50 units, or each acre gets about 50 units. Is that what it is?
Yeah, so, and again, we took that cue from the dog bone report, as we call it. They were looking already, this transit-oriented development initiative was looking already at what type of development might be realistic here. So they had sort of a range in there of 52 to 60 units per acre.
Based on the height restrictions and things like that.
Yep.
Yeah. And so 50 units, I would think I don't know, 5 buildings could fit in the back parking lots, I'm just guessing. And that would take up a lot of parking if there were no requirements. And I just want you, that would be an example of an unintended consequence. The other concern I had is thorough, and I haven't read through it all, but I look forward to, as thorough as this was data that you received from other people. It wasn't data that your group gathered.
Yeah, with very minor exceptions. We did a little bit more with the on-street parking because there wasn't as much data there. But mostly we're using counts that had already been performed.
Okay. And I want to just bring this to the council's attention that I had asked certain people in the past when the counts were done, and I actually said, well, was the count done on Friday, Saturday, Sunday? And the reply was, our consultant, or it wasn't your company, but our person doesn't work on the weekends. And I thought, that's a pretty important piece of data that we have to gather. This is a really, really, there may have been other times when they did count the weekends, but these are the critical times that have to be counted. And I think you'd agree, as someone that's analyzing data, you've got to have the best possible sets. And so I just want to suggest that to the council. One other point that was brought to me by someone that works at Hannaford, and I'd have to reconfirm this because it was a few years ago, but I've brought this up before, and I don't know if you've ever done anything for like a market basket, but the Hannaford requires, when they go into a place, 6 spaces per 1,000, not 3, and they only count on those being full 6 times a year. Have you ever heard of any statistics like that for a like a supermarket? Which, if that's true, would indicate that these peak times were really, really critical to the retailers.
So a couple things there. Grocery stores are definitely a different land use in all of the models than regular retail. And it is generally a bit higher than retail overall for demand. That being said, a lot of times what we see for parking demand and aiming for even the 20th busiest hour of the year, a particular tenant may want actually more parking than that their interests are, often to say we want to absolutely make sure we never run out of parking. So there can be a natural tension there between what a supermarket owner wants if they control the land or if they don't, versus what we see for parking demand. But grocery stores are different than retail.
And forgive me, I wasn't trying to draw the comparison from grocery stores to retail, but more that they demand they need a number of parking spaces for these peak times, which are more critical, I think, and from my observation compared to when I was a kid, that the shopping malls seem to be packed all the time. But I think those peaks are, and you may have data to show. To agree or not agree with this, are fewer and further between. So those peak times, and I operate a business in town, and I see those peak times being really strong, but they're less than they were in the past. How does the data show from what you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, so I think overall, just generally, there's a balance to it, where again, there's typically you don't want to design the parking for the absolute busiest moment or hour or day of the year. It's just going to, again, mostly go unused. It takes up a lot of space and costs a lot. So there's some, balance to it. So what, the shared parking model over the years, working with a lot of people, it's also sponsored by the International Council of Shopping Centers, that model, and the National Parking Association. But again, to achieve that balance, for most land uses, 85th percentile, because you can, more readily maybe afford a few days where you don't have enough parking and people find some other way. For retail and for grocery stores, things like that, again, it's the 20th busiest hour of the year. So recognizing that you do want to get closer to the absolute peak, but still not design the parking for, the very busiest moment of the year.
Okay.
So I just want to take a second and make sure that council, do we have any other questions or thoughts?
I do have one sort of request, and it's either Sophie, Brett, or anybody up here, I guess. I'm sure Alabine is aware that we're doing this. They own half the spaces in town. I'm sure they have thoughts about which lots they can sell for housing, how much parking they want to have available for their stores, whether they want it to be free, whether they want it to be paid. So I don't want to take direction from them, certainly, but I am curious about their opinion about where all this lands in the end, and if they have a vision. I'd love for that to be a piece of the puzzle that we hear about. So if we haven't had that dialogue, it'd be good to have it and report back on where they are, or invite them to talk if they want to come.
So I think we did share this report with them, and we have a meeting with them in June, so I'll ask what they think.
Is there going to be like a workshop on this? Because, you know, it would be nice for some people to be able to talk in a workshop.
Well, I definitely encourage you two to keep speaking. I think if there's any other changes to potential next steps, ordinances or otherwise, or policy, that would go through the appropriate processes where we'd have public hearings. So, yeah.
I appreciate that. I feel like I have a lot of knowledge, and I'd like to try to offer some answers to any questions that you might have.
Yeah.
I don't know if I think I also heard a few points that from counselors and from Greg about this idea. I don't know if there's an understanding of shared parking versus private lots. I don't know that there are too many private lots in town. I believe most of it's shared. Do you recollect that?
Yeah, so there was more, I think another 700 spaces or so in the downtown district that weren't part, formally at least, of the shared parking system. So again, to kind of be conservative, we just focused on spaces that were formally part of Freeport's shared parking system. But there is, I think, about 700. It's in the report, something around another 700 spaces that are not part of the system.
Yeah. But thank you.
Which is about a third of the bunch that you're talking about.
Yeah, a quarter.
25% of the total, right?
Yep.
Shared parking means you can just show up in anybody's lot and park there. Is that how you would describe it in the pool?
Yeah, I mean, especially since it's all unpaid here. But yes, that is the intent, I believe, of the shared parking system. Anybody can use it.
I think, this gives us great data. That wasn't us. Great data, great sort of a way to organize it and present a lot of data in a helpful way. I think what is coming up, as I'm hearing from you and Andy before he left, is there's puzzle pieces we need to make sure we're keeping track of here as we use this information to make decisions moving forward.
Yeah, and that's what I want to bring to
Yeah.
light. I want more housing. I absolutely do.
Yeah.
And I could also say, if someone had a crystal ball and would say, pack the parking lots or most of the parking lots
Yep.
with housing, and these people would not be here from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. like guaranteed, or weren't allowed to park there, or on the weekends, it would be a natural fit. But they're going to be parking there, especially on the weekends and the holidays potentially. Rightfully, because they live there and they want to park there. So it could also create a backlog. So I'd just be ask you to be cognizant of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
absolutely.
would just say, we did have the drone photography from weekends in December just last year. So that was part of all of this, and it is still, 39% again is what we would recommend designing for, or assuming is currently occupied. But again, you can adjust that as you move forward. And
Yeah.
we did have weekend data from the drone.
And also, speaking with the manager, we've discussed that there has been some weekend counting as well through various sources. So.
And I hope there is. I know there was one anecdote where I asked about this, and someone said, we were off on the weekends. I'm going, oh my God.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you got to get the really good data,
Yeah.
because these peak days, and I hit this home, they're fewer and further between, and they're critical.
Yeah. Well, Jay, if I know you're going to keep making sure we're good on this and
Well, yeah.
keep us accountable and thinking about these things. So thank you.
I want to get to the end of a good product that makes the visitor that's coming to Freeport not be frustrated
Yeah.
that they can't find a space. They'll just go back to Boston,
Yeah.
or go to Kittery, which is oftentimes hard to find a place.
Yeah.
So that's one of our special nuggets here.
Agreed.
I appreciate you putting this up. Thank you very much. I hope you appreciate my questions.
Yes. Thank you very much. And thank you.